everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace. This week's show is on the grief and loss associated with death. When I said I wouldn't shy away from tough topics, I meant it. But death is hard for all of us, and we need to process it and heal. On lighter subjects, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, register with StreamYard so we can see your name when you comment or have a question. Please keep all comments and questions related to the show topic, and remember, this is a safe space. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors: Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, Heidi. You guys rock and enable the show to go on. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it. I have all the options under sherrypalace.com at my website. Use the support tab. There are literally dozens of ways to show your support. But most importantly, thanks in advance for supporting me and being here and welcoming us into your home. We appreciate you. Before we start the show, I want to mention a project that I started along with the help of our beloveds Anna Garcia Lucas, Michelle Saveco, and Michael Zanker, who's with us tonight. It's called A Moment of Love. It costs nothing and only takes a moment of your time. Our goal is to cover the world with love. All you have to do is let me know your location so we can add you to the map and share the movement with your friends and family. All of this is leading up to a Giving Love Away Day, which is GLAD, on November 6th, where our intention is to flood the world with love. I am super excited about it, and I hope you'll join us. Go to my website again, sherrypalace.com, or look up the group on Facebook, A Moment of Love. Spread love by spreading the word. Thanks in advance for your support and taking a moment to share the love. Okay, on with the show. Let's meet our guests. Guess I have to share screens, right? Like I forget what I'm doing. There we go. Peter Hu is an entrepreneurial leader from Singapore working in the fintech space. He is an empathetic communicator, adept at bridging East-West cultural divides. His passions are the Enneagram, intersectionality, and healing trauma. When he's not working, he is at the gym or finding ways to encourage others. Welcome, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
I'm so glad you're here. Next, we have Reverend Canon. He is a husband, father, Episcopal Priest, artist, and an enrolled member in the, I have to ask you how to pronounce this, Oglala Lakota Oyate. Correct me when you get one. He serves as a missioner for the Department of Indian Work, Episcopal Church in Minnesota, and a vicar of All Saints Indian Mission in South Minneapolis. Members of All Saints are immersed in food justice with their ministry, First Nations Kitchen. Welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you.
And last but definitely not least, we have Zanker back. Mike Zanker became a pastor in 1990 and has been the senior pastor of Hope Fellowship Community Church in Waterloo, Ontario since December of 2003. Mike launched Growing in Grace Ministries Canada in 2006, which is a teaching and training ministry focused on identity in Christ and understanding forgiveness. Mike's trials in life have helped him on the journey of understanding religion and discovering a greater grace. He serves as a fire department chaplain, a long-term care home chaplain, and a funeral home chaplain, providing hope, love, and light to those walking through dark times. Welcome, Mike. So glad you're here.
It's good to be here. This is going to be fun.
Thank you so much for joining this panel. In 2 weeks, it'll be the 20th year since my mom's death. In 20 years, it hasn't gotten any easier. I miss her more now than I did the day she passed. But I know I would not be the person I am today if she was still here. I kind of became a grown-up when she died. None of us escape death in our own lives or in our loved ones. It is part of life. They have discovered that the jellyfish, a bacteria, the bristlecone pine trees, and hydra, which is a small freshwater organism, are technically immortal, but that's just within our planet and limited knowledge. Even stars die. Our sun will one day cease to exist. Our planet will become a dead rock. Each culture processes death differently. Western culture believes sin causes death, which adds all kinds of layers of trauma that isn't needed. Paul made death a punishment, which only added fear to the immense loss. According to the Old Testament, sin was so bad during Noah's time that the entire planet needed to be flooded, and those people supposedly lived 1,000 years. So sin causing death was just the ancients' way of trying to understand and process their losses. So let's talk about some healthier ways now that we're wiser and process the immense pain of losing a loved one. So let's start with a dying person. There's a lot of fear in what they are going through. What are they experiencing and crossing over, in your opinion? Peter, do you want to start?
Wow. I guess they're crossing the Jordan, and we don't actually know what's involved in the journey across the Jordan and what lies beyond. So it's this journey into the unknown. We assume that they are afraid. They might not be afraid. We might be the ones projecting our fear on them. That's
Mike,
all I have to say for now. Yeah.
Mike, you're a chaplain. You walk through people through their dying days. What do you think?
To what? What's
What, as far as as someone is dying, what are they experiencing as they're crossing over? As far as your knowledge, we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I ask every time. I've sat with people who have died, those that were dying. I get notifications when somebody's gone palliative or there's not much time left. I rarely get a call before the person dies for the funeral when I do a funeral home visit. So when I get to meet the dying person first, it's really helpful. But I ask them to describe, how are you feeling? Are there things you're afraid of? Are there things you want to process? And there's a lot of things that can go on. Some people say they're totally at peace. Others say they're scared. You can tell. Usually it's they're waiting for a loved one, or they're waiting for the loved one to leave.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't want to
They want to die alone.
Die?
Yep. They're trying to avoid pain of others.
Wow.
That's just what I've seen so far. I'm sure Robert's got some ideas too.
Love. That is pure love. Robert, what do you think they're experiencing?
Well, I mean, I think it's really, each experience with each individual's it's different, of course, just based on how they live their life, I think. Some people have a hard time letting go, others are ready to go, and it depends on where they're at in their journey here in this life.
My mom, the last time that she was awake, realized we had to rush her to hospice because we had decided she wasn't going to die in the apartment, and there was no room in hospice. So we had to rush her to hospice to get her there so she could pass there. And she woke up right as they were putting her in the bed, and she cursed. She never cursed. And she started throwing the blankets and said, "Get me the hell out of here." And I had to calm her down. And she made me promise her to let her know when she was dying. She really wanted to know. But during that moment, she was so frantic and just wanted to get home. I just said rest. But when she took her last breaths, I knew she was gone. It wasn't, the room emptied. It was such a strange thing. She just wanted to see Jesus, so she was ready to go. Her only fear was that she didn't believe in the right God, which was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Okay, so what can we do when we know someone is going to die to eliminate or at least lessen some of the pain when they're gone?
Can't eliminate it.
Pardon me?
You can't eliminate it. Get that misconception out of the way.
I tried.
I think that a big part of the pain comes from regrets, from the dying person's regrets, as well as those that the person survives. So we might have, I think, a lot of grief when we have had things that we've left unsaid.
Yeah.
to the dying person, and the dying person might have had things that he or she has left unsaid, like love or apologies.
Hey, Anna. Yeah, I mean, when my mom got cancer, I would lay awake at night to try and figure out questions I could ask her, just and things to say, so there were no regrets. Of course, there's a million regrets because I couldn't think of anything or everything, or things I did in the last days. Um, that is one of the gifts of cancer in a really weird way, is you are given that time. Mike, what is your experience?
Well, I think I've been focusing on what people say to someone who's passing, or even worse, at a funeral. All the things you should never say. But I came across a healthy list of what you could say to a person that is passing. It's called Last Words, 6 Things to Say When Someone is Dying. I'm going to post it in the comments, but the first one is to communicate I love you, saying thank you, I forgive you, forgive me, I will be okay, and goodbye. The one I focused on the most is letting the person know it's okay, we're going to be okay, you can let go now. I am not surprised anymore when the families listen and they do that privately with their loved one. The loved one's gone quick. Not long after that. And I don't know what it is, a soulical connection. I just don't know, but it's pretty powerful.
My mom was going strong, and then a week before she passed, she's just said, "This is it, I'm done." And she was gone in 5 days. Like that. Once she gave up. Robert, what do you think?
Well, it's difficult when someone's, kind of already were detaching. So like with my dad, who died this past February, in the last year, he was aging, and there's a lot less one could communicate with him, partly because his hearing was getting pretty bad, and he was having a hard time hearing what was being said, and just that basic communication, and also just his memory, short-term memory loss, that kind of thing. And so you see that. I don't want to call it a decline. It's just part of life and living. We age, and our parts of ourselves are slowly shutting down. So you can't really communicate all the things you really wanted to say, until it's you just sort of wish, and think about it and process it. So in some ways, that's when a parent or any elder goes through that aging process, it just makes it hard, because all that wisdom that they had and that they had shared, you just wish that they could tell you those stories again and again and again, but after a while they can't, because it's not in their memory, or they cannot communicate it, or whatever. So that part's really difficult and tough, it's just for me, it was just sort of an acceptance that this is part of the journey, part of the life, and it's just something one has to accept. And then I found myself thinking about all those stories and all the wisdom that my dad had shared with me, and just trying to remember, just trying to remember.
Can I ask you a question, Robert?
Yeah.
Since this was fresh for you, and you talk about acceptance, have you had time to think through how that acceptance worked its way out? Because to hear someone say that, it's nice, but what does it look like? How did you walk through acceptance? Were you already on the journey of acceptance, or did you have to process that when things started to get really close?
Well, I started processing it, yeah. But it was, I knew his time was coming, because it was just, he had a fall. hit his head, and so my experience with that is, it's just a matter of time, and so coming to that level of acceptance, and just when the time came, of course it was hard and difficult and all that, and I'm still processing it, and I still have my moments of where I just feel really down, and just keep going through it. As Lakotas, we talk that we mourn and grieve for 1 year, and then at the anniversary of when my dad died, we'll have another memorial, we'll have a big feast, a big giveaway, and then we're allowed to now then continue with our lives and our celebrations. So like for instance now there's all these what we call cheapies or powwows that go on during the summer. Well, we're told we shouldn't go to those. We're grieving, or go to anything like fun and exciting. We just sit with our grief for the year. And that's just sort of part of the process, It's what me and my family are doing now. I was just out there, sitting in his room and feeling really sad and all that, just part of the process.
So some people, they actually try to avoid feeling sad by getting busy or doing something else, but yet I hear you say it's important to allow those emotions, those feelings to process. That's how acceptance happens. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, you got to grieve, I think
people don't know how to grieve, though.
Well, it's because society tells you not to. I think we lost that a long time ago. It's just like, because they'll say out, I grew up in South Dakota, one of the things is you got to cowboy up. Don't cry, or especially for men, it's like, don't cry. But, when I was a kid growing up, my grandfather, I remember seeing him mourn and grieve and cry at the graveside over one of my cousins who had died young, that's the first time I've seen a real man cry, because he was a tough dude, I was just like, and I was just a little guy when that happened, and so when I saw that, I said, man, it's okay to cry, it's okay to grieve, My grandpa was going through it.
I think there's definitely, in my own life, I have seen when we are able to process and it gets to a level of acceptance. For my grandparents, they immigrated from Russia and helped actually found Russian Hill in San Francisco. And one of part of their funerary practices are to sit in front of an open casket for a minimum of 8 hours, maximum of 3 days. My family, of course, chose the lesser at 8 hours. But after about 3 or 4, you're kind of done. It was an amazing thing because you've cried. We started noticing his pants were too short. We started noticing these other things that were taking away from our pain. On the contrary, when my ex-husband died, I didn't get to go to the funeral because I was out of the country. I didn't get anything to mourn. And the difference in those two is, one I have closure for, the other I don't. I'm still expecting him to call. It's a really strange feeling. I know they're both gone, but one I was able to process and one I wasn't.
I've been exposed to some very different practices, funerary practices. I come from Asia, where we have a different way of honoring the dead as compared with in the West. But I also am influenced by Western Christianity, which my family is Christian. And I've come across some really bizarre Christian practices, such as giving thanks and celebrating during funerals, because we want to celebrate that the dead person has graduated into heaven, which I think is really fucked up. I think it's so fucked up. My grandma my grandma was not just, I mean, she was a very devout Christian. She wasn't just a prayer warrior, she was a prayer general. But she did not know how to process grief. And when she died, she wanted to be cremated. And so we kind of cremated her. We went on the sea to scatter her ashes and singing songs like Amazing Grace. But we never really grieved her. And I only during COVID, when I had some time for self-reflection, I realized I haven't really grieved her, and that I don't think that we can just move on. So even though my family was Christian and practiced Christian practices, but the Chinese actually have a festival called Qingming, which is on once a year we honor our dead, our ancestors. So we go to the tombs and we kind of like honor them one day a year, which I think is practical. You know, it's expedient and it's pragmatic. On one day of the year, you give yourself that space to grieve, and the rest of the year you can function.
I like that. I know that there are what we view as strange funerary practices. In the Philippines, there is a tribe where they embalm and mummify their family, and they stay in the home with them for a year. There's another, I think it's in Bali, where they full on celebrate for a week. They get drunk, they bring the bodies around, and it is a full on celebration. And even in India, there is a practice where the monks go and sit with the dead and spend the night with them. And as far as Western culture, all of you are like, oh dear Lord, how could anyone do that? But I think in a way, accepting that may be a little bit more healthy than denying it, right?
Yeah, I think the Christian church the Western evangelical church, if I can call it that, which is around the world, has really screwed up this whole process of grief, because if especially if you're in the charismatic bent, you become a joy boy and you're supposed to be happy. You're not allowed to feel the sadness, and if you do, you're not really a good Christian. Everybody's judging each other, and it's awful. And that's when the worst things are said. You know, this is all God's plan. Oh, slap them hard, like all that kind of crap. So yeah, I still use the term celebration of life, and it took me a little while to get used to, but now I see the services that I do as a true celebration of the person's life, how they lived, and grieving their loss all at the same time, because that's exactly what's happening. We got these stages of grief, but there's an assumption that they go in order. They don't. They're like a ricochet all over the place and just have different intensity. So when we're celebrating someone's life at a funeral, there could be times of deep crying, and suddenly you start laughing because you just saw a hilarious picture, but now it's constantly all over the place. And to give people permission that you don't get over it, you will get through it, and it may never end. Because people think grief has an ending. Oh, you should be over this now. No way. The intensity of the sadness will diminish somewhat, but to get over it, no, there's no such thing. I think that's an expectation that puts people in a very difficult place, and they don't know how to grieve because somebody told them that. So all these misunderstandings about grief are hindering them from grieving. That's what I think.
Well, and like, you know, Robert said, you know, man up, put on your boots. I want to take a quick stop. Anna wants to come on. Hello, beautiful.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I just got off.
That's okay. Thanks for joining us.
I do have, as you were talking about the man up aspect, and Robert, what you were talking about, I followed your post as your father had passed and read a lot of what you posted. And it hit me when my father's mother, when my grandmother, who was my version of spiritual love, when she died, my grandfather was already passed. He cried, and that was the first time I had ever seen him cry, and that moved me in ways that I can't imagine. I'm glad you cried. it's the whole aspect of witnessing what love looks like in that moment and what should be allowed, because we were raised, like you said, you don't show the emotions. You keep it in. You stay strong. You stay. I'm not sure exactly what to say. You stay strong looking, even if you don't feel it. And I wonder, did any of your family talk to you about how that made them feel when you cried?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay, no,
Yes,
yeah,
Robert. Well, everybody after you too.
no, I don't think no one's ever asked me that. It's because it's an interesting thing, and when I look back on going to funerals and stuff, and then compared to now, it's like we were careful with our language, right? I mean, we don't say someone died. We say, oh, they passed. And it's like, well, no, they died. That's kind of what that word means. It's like pass. It's like sort of like waters it down some. Whereas dying is something that's like their journey here in this life is over. And so I stick to the hard languages. And just say this person died, and it's okay to grieve. It's okay. And when I was a kid, there was always and I know they have these in a lot of societies where they have professional mourners. They'll show up to funerals and they'll mourn for that person. They're there the whole time. They support the family. Then, they're at every funeral. There's less and less of those folks around nowadays. I don't know if it's because of just how we've been changing and stuff. But it's interesting when I back home, like there's a lot more drinking goes on, and I think that's a way for people to grieve, to be able to cry, because otherwise they wouldn't do it. They would, of course, the alcohol sort of opens one's up to all these feelings, and so people are crying around and stuff like that. But when I was talking to a friend of mine who's an Anglican priest in England, and he spent time in East London, and he said, "Well, that's exactly how they do it there. It's just one great big party, because everybody's, that's the only way they can grieve, I guess, But it's something that's happening more and more in some of our communities back home. We're not able to let it out. It's bottled up inside, and I think that's problematic.
And why do you think that is? Because we can see beauty in death in so many other places. Of course,
well, I think it's where I'm from, in just a lot of our communities here, not even in Minnesota, a lot of my clergy colleagues, they just do a tremendous amount of funerals. Some average, one a week sometimes. And that's a lot. Just in my family, extended family, and I was just there this past week. We had 2 deaths in my extended family, and they're younger than I am. It's from health reasons and stuff like that. But it's just like that's. I've been in a lot of places now. Lived on the East Coast, West Coast, and served in a pretty much all white church. And there's probably been I remember spending 3 years in this one parish, and there was probably 2 funerals the time I was there. Just 2. And compared to where I'm from, it's just like, that's just unheard of almost.
I mean, people travel for thousands of miles to go see the trees die each year. We can see beauty in death in so many other aspects. elephants mourn their young, they mourn a stranger. So grief is not exceptionally or universally individually ours. But why do you think that we can see beauty in death in so many other things and never or rarely see it in ourselves, in the people that we love?
Can I share
Of course.
my experience might not necessarily be a universal experience, and I don't intend to prescribe a best way to grieve. But I do believe that there is a grace and an equanimity in grieving. So we had another grandma die in February this year, and in November last year, my husband got a dream about it, and so we were sufficiently prepared that this is going to happen, and it did happen according to the dream. And I think that was just our higher power preparing us for this thing that was going to happen. And I do want to share as well that we've ministered to people, we've met people who have also been overcome by their grief. And there's this lady that we ministered to, her sister has been dead 9 years. And I think that there's a tendency to deny space, to not hold space for the grief. There's also a tendency to get lost in it. And I'm not saying that that's the best approach for everyone, but I think there is, a gracious way to cope with our grief. And I think that as we depend on our higher power to lead us, to guide us, that there's a good way for us to approach it.
One thing that I appreciated, because I was raised Catholic, but at the same time we had a lot of the Mexican customs within our family. So Dia de los Muertos, when you remembered and brought closer those family members that had died, I mean, you had pictures, you had gifts to them, you celebrated with them. For us, they were very much there. As a little girl, it always kind of creeped me out. And at the same time, I found that more comforting to think that they were always around me, even if I couldn't see them. Conversely, when we participated in or went to a Catholic funeral, and this was something that you had talked about, Peter, it was very sad. It was distraught. It was a loss. And I'm not saying that death isn't a loss. There was a recognition of both the celebration of the life and a recognition of the loss. And we always had good get-togethers afterwards. The reception or when the family and the extended family got together, everybody brought food, everybody talked, everybody came together. And yes, Robert, we had the tias, the great aunties who came to everybody's funeral because they knew everybody, and they kind of showed us how to do it. Yes, you grieved, but at the same time, you told stories. You had little tales to tell of the person who was now gone. And those tales seemed to keep alive. Mm-hmm. They seemed to keep alive the ones that were lost. So while you felt the absence of their physical presence, the memories and all the times, the laughter, that kind of kept it alive in a good way for you. So down the road when you got together, oh, you remember when Auntie talked about they did this, or you remember when they were walking down the street and they did this, and it made it easier to connect what was to where you were now. I don't know. That's what it felt like for me.
I have found that when I lose someone, being able to talk about who they were is healing. Would you guys agree? I know you do, Anna. You just said so.
And when we lost people in the military, especially when we were deployed, and we lost, whether it was one or whether it was a great number, the memorial that we held for them, while it hurt to have the person that you may have had breakfast with that morning, while it may have hurt to have them gone, there was an honor that I felt that was bestowed upon them, and it connected everybody who was there. And I wonder what that would look like in a Catholic funeral now, if we look towards the honor and how that connected us. And I don't know. I lost everything I was thinking of just then. But the honor, celebrating the honor that we held for them, and the camaraderie.
So how do we process some loss and regrets that come from it? Peter, you mentioned regrets earlier. Regrets after death, I don't know that there's any type of regret that's stronger. So how do we deal with processing those regrets when you can no longer say you're sorry, when you can no longer say the things that you wanted to say because the death was so sudden and you weren't prepared for it? Anybody, take it away.
I don't know if you can prepare, but each time you slow down and hear the heart of somebody who's going through something difficult, like Robert when he was going through difficult things, and Anna's reading these posts, like you're identifying with a part of our common humanity. And yet in our culture, we're so busy, we don't take time for that because we're too busy dealing with our calendars, or we have vices that we're running to avoid having to feel real life. And we've never learned to process real life feelings. And so when a crisis hits, I'm convinced that, because I've seen enough families now, that if you have unresolved issues at the moment of a key family member's death, look out, the fangs are coming out, because it's not going to get easier, it's going to get harder, and it gets nasty. And I see families break up more and more because it turns into a money thing, it's the power thing, or everybody's grievances are suddenly aired, and it's like, wait a minute, you're here for your loved one. You know, and I sit in the room constantly hearing this stuff year after year with family after family, and it's a, how do you prepare? Learn, be aware in the moment of somebody else's pain. When you've gone through your own pain, don't forget it. You know, life's short. Nobody gets out alive. Seriously, think about that.
So as you all have gotten older, has it changed how you mourned?
I'm not older.
Yeah, me either. Listen up, woman. No, I mentioned this to you, Anna, on social media. I had a song came on the radio 2 weeks ago. I was driving, had a very long drive, and I was flooded with, I've heard this song probably 1,000 times since my mom passed, and I was flooded with memories that I had totally suppressed of us dancing around her living room. Sorry, I'm getting emotional again. I didn't remember any of that. And to be put back into that position, the grief was overwhelming. And it's 20 years. Mm-hmm. So I think that what we do is we, like Mike said, like everybody has said, we learn to cope, but I don't think it gets any easier. It's just we find other ways of distractions, like Mike said. Here. What is that? Is that a tissue box? I know. Yeah. I didn't even have any tissue with me for this show. My God. But yeah, I mean, the mourning is more of an acceptance, but the grief still just pops up and knocks me on my ass sometimes. I mean, only the last couple years have I not gone into a full-on meltdown on the anniversary of her death. It's amazing.
I think you and I talked about this just before we started the show, that even at the funeral, you think you're grieving, and you're only reacting to a certain level, a certain consciousness of grief.
Yeah.
But later, when you actually have all the stress deflated, and then you begin to process maturely those emotions. Because I remember when my mom died, I felt bad for saying this, and some people thought, "Oh, you must be so sad." I'm thinking, "I'm glad. Goodbye, good riddance." I was so happy to see her gone in some way, because I couldn't stand her. She was not a nice person to me. A lot of issues, and so that was at the time of her grief. And I did the ritual of, I did her funeral, fine, took care of stuff, helped my dad. That's how I processed it. And then the next number of years, the journey of forgiveness, awareness, because now the stress is gone. Now I'm seeing more clearly. It's like, oh my, I'm not getting older. I'm seeing things more clearly. And I'm realizing, hang on, there are some contributing factors that are in her life that made her treat me the way she did. And only now am I taking the time and have the patience to acknowledge that and realize, wow, like, in fact, I had a pretty cool experience once where I was supposed to do a graveside funeral at the same cemetery my mom's at, and I felt God tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, go see your mom at the end of the service when you're done." I went, "No," and so got to the funeral, did the burial, and was on my way out of the parking lot, and it was like tap, tap, tap on my shoulder. It's like, oh, fine. So I went over to the graveside where my mom was. Say, "Hey, Mom," and it was like God was saying, "You've been learning an awful lot about quantum physics, about near-death experiences. You've seen stuff firsthand. Your own journey of grace has been incredible. What do you think, first of all, would your mom have seen or believed as she was crossing over? Do you think she would have seen light?" "Yeah." "Okay. I also believe that when we cross over, that we're not going to have all the hindrances of our earthly life. Through the glass darkly, it's kind of released. And so on the other side, you're going to see truth and light for what it really is, without all of our contaminations and filters." And then he said, if your mom could peek through quantum the weird freaky tiki kind of peek through the universe and peek her head through, what do you think she would say to you? And I wept. I lost it, because I realized my mom would say, "I am so sorry," because she now knows differently. It's like, oh man. And that was a forgiveness that came to me I could not plan for. And from then on, a different affection has come to me. I don't speak of her harshly anymore. I don't use the word hate. In fact, I actually had a feeling of, I actually miss her, which is, what? I actually said that. So it's not done. I'm still growing in this. And this is like 8-9 years ago. So you know what? We're not done. And so I think there's much to learn, and hearing from other people's journeys, you learn.
Peter?
I don't think that we necessarily grow more skilled at grieving. Rather, I think that as we grow older, we do get wiser about living, about life, in order to die without regrets, in order to get, to that stage.
But you have to be willing to believe that wisdom, or it's no good to you.
That's right. And how to apply that wisdom, because it takes some time for that wisdom to travel from our heads to our hearts. And it's also, like what Mike shared about how we see things. And as we grow in maturity, we see things differently. And we see, okay, my mom or so-and-so was a tough, cruel person to me, but look at what he or she had to endure because of the war. We see things differently, we contemplate more. And to your question, Sherry, how do we resolve those unexpressed hurts or regrets? I think we can't do it without community. And not community where you don't feel seen or heard, but community where people actually are able to empathize and able to hold space for you, so
Yeah.
that you can, in due course, you can truly let go.
You know, I will say, with COVID and with the gravitation towards social media more than I have ever been on social media before, and Robert, I felt it with you quite a bit. Connecting with somebody who vocalized their grief helped internally to vocalize any grief that I'm, like grief ghosts that were still hanging around. I felt, if I could have found out where you were, Robert, and driven to where you were and just said, tell me a story about your dad, I would have. And quite honestly, it wouldn't have been for you, it would have been for me, because I want to feel, I felt so much of what you were talking about. I wanted to be closer, to not feel so isolated, even though I didn't know you that well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even now, as others post about their families who pass, who die, and when they give tributes through social media about that, I feel the same thing. I want to be there. I want to hear the stories. I want that capacity of connection, because it echoes in my pain and my sorrow and my mourning. And I just want that community, like you were talking about, Peter. I want that community. I want to be with somebody to offer what I can to help. And to not feel alone, because it brings up what I've been through.
Yeah, I think it's looking at one of these comments from a Facebook user, from Proverbs 25:11. The right word at the right time is like precious gold set in silver. And I think about, as a lot of things that you wished you asked or said, to someone, reminds me of being in recovery now for a long time. We made amends, as part of our recovery process, and I made amends to my parents years ago, things I did as, in my younger days and stuff. And, and that was at the moment, that's what this particular proverb reminds me of. But there's a lot of people I couldn't do that with. It was too late. So I had to hold that. Like, well, what do you do with all that? Sort of those, you wish you could have made those amends. And
well, that's what Peter's talking about. In his culture, every year you go to that place, and there's an opportunity for amends quietly between you and them in spirit.
Yeah, but that's true. But I'm down to, like,
direct.
Yeah, direct. What is it that holds us back at that moment where we can't do it, or it's like, am I going to hurt somebody or whatever? That's like what the 12 steps says. It's about lest you harm somebody, by making these amends. So anyway, it's like when I think about that, and as I grow older, it's I'm almost 60. I'll be 60 next year, and it's I think about okay, I got much more wisdom than I did 30 years ago, for sure. But I think about, like, especially with my dad, in these last 20 years, we have cell phones, right? And we would call each other all the time, and I miss those phone calls. Like, if I'm driving down the road and it's like early in the morning, I'm going somewhere, and I'm like, oh, now's a good time to call Dad, because he'll be up and we could chat. And then I have to catch myself. It's like, oh wait, he's not there. And one of the hardest things that that for me right now is deleting all those messages he's left. I haven't yet, I can't even listen to him right now, just because I know it'll be really overwhelming. And they're still on my phone, and I think about like when my dad was, when his father died, all he had were these two, those old reel-to-reel recordings. That's all he had of his voice, and he couldn't listen to him for the longest time. But after a while, he couldn't, because there was no way he could play them. But
you can save those recordings onto your computer, so you can get them off your phone. There's a way to do that.
Yeah, I'll figure that out. And it's just to hear the voice, that's technology, man. It's like
my planted in a teddy bear.
Yeah, and it's something I think it's both a blessing and it's something hard to carry too, to hear the voice. And you got the videos too, got those on my phone as well,
My daughter had her first baby, my first granddaughter, and like you just mentioned, my first thought was to call my mom, who I would have never called. She died 13 years ago. I would have never called her. I would have texted or something, because I was too afraid of being rejected, as I had been before. But now, like Mike was saying, like Robert, he was saying, I want that. I want that connection. I want that, Mom, look.
Yeah.
So we can be that now for our loved ones. That's how we learn.
Yeah. It's, thinking back, like what things that we just shared, with about 10, 15 years ago, I started developing this liturgy, burial and vigil liturgy. So what I found, like with the Episcopal liturgy, which is good, it's one of the, it's a good way to sort of go through that experience, the grieving part and all the readings and the prayers and stuff. But what I found was that liturgy only works in a church setting. A lot of in their communities on the reservations, they moved out of the church and into the community halls and gymnasiums. So I found that we had to develop something that could fit in that space. And so we started doing this liturgy. So the long story short, which I found really interesting, was when I gathered a bunch of people together, clergy and lay people, and talking about the liturgy and what we could do. And there's all these great ideas came out of it. But there was the part that I wanted to focus on is, okay, we broke it up into 7 parts, and so the 7th part was working with after everything's done. After the funeral's done, after the burial's done, that period of time is the most loneliest for people that are grieving. And so I was asking for volunteers to help me, develop something, and everybody was doing all the other stuff, but only got 2 people who were interested in that part of it. And it's something that I think it speaks to how we deal with death, dying, and grieving. It's something we want to avoid, this grief, this mourning process.
Vulnerability is a motherfucker.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. One of the lay folks, she had lost her husband. That they were married for many years, and so she decided to take it upon herself to visit people who were grieving after loss of a loved one. So she was doing this. She was as part of her ministry. Then she finally told the priest. She goes, told him what she was doing, and instead of saying, "Oh, that's great," his response was, who told you to do that?
Oh.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh.
know,
I think part of the another necessary thing to do is also to get your theology about heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Kind of not.
That's
I'm
for
not-
another
I'm not-
show.
Yeah, I'm not promising. I'm not
Seriously.
promising theological certainty, but also to at least study and come to a place where a place of peace about it. And just what is your best effort at trying to understand these constructs and coming to a place where you are at peace, and then you've done your best to try to understand if they're just really in a better place or it's just soporific. I mean, you come to kind of like a conclusion or settledness within your own self about those things.
Maybe
Death
it's not so much
doulas.
about. Oh, go ahead.
They have the death doulas now, right?
Yeah.
Like they have the birth doulas, those women who come and help as one to help your journey as you die, just like you help a mother give birth, they help somebody through their death. And I don't know very much about it. Maybe it's a lot like the hospice chaplain, but I think that aspect of being with as the process goes, and that I believe those doulas also follow up with the family after, like you were saying, Robert, so that, because it's usually like 2 or 3 months right after somebody dies, everybody forgets about you. Everybody just goes away because it's uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to say the wrong thing. But yeah, Robert, that's when you need them the most. So
Yeah,
how
that's
do
right.
we as lay people, as friends, as community, how do we become death doulas?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, so during like the right after someone dies, it's like you get all the casseroles, right? And then
Yes.
after it's all said and done, you're eating all what you froze in the freezer, and nobody comes around.
Casseroles.
you know?
Casseroles are everywhere when someone dies. It's like the Christian thing to do, or I don't think other things do that, right?
Yeah, but there's after that, then nobody shows up.
Yeah.
It's like,
Your plate is empty.
yeah.
So, Mike, you had mentioned that there was a list of things not to say. I know that list has got to be probably inclusive in a book, but can you cover some of the things that are generally said the most often that we should avoid at all costs if someone is grieving?
These are cringeworthy, though. These are awful. And it's usually church people that use them. Foolish things like God has a plan. We talked about that. Or God doesn't give you more than you can handle, which is BS. They pull up that one verse. I posted that in the comments. And that text on God won't let you go through anything more than you can handle has nothing to do with trials. It has everything to do with temptations. You're not going to be tempted beyond what's normal to humanity. So to get that out right away, because God's not a bringer on of pain. He's a life giver. He doesn't do death. And so this is a really big, again, as we were saying there, your theology will matter. Oh, you'll see her again someday. She's in a better place. Or even worse, God only takes the best. Well, what does that make us? Like, it's just crazy where that goes. But there's a whole list here. I've got like 20, 30 things. Or God must really love you to have selected you for this burden. On and on. Yeah, like there's a horrible thing.
What are the right things to say?
So the right things to say. Hang on, I got a list. I actually, there are some things. Here we go. The best things to say to someone in grief is, I am so sorry for your loss. My heart aches for you. I wish I had the right words. Just know I care. I don't know how you feel, but I'm here to help in any way I can. You and your loved one will be in my thoughts and prayers, the trite thoughts and prayers, but when you say it with meaning in your eyes, it makes it different. Or my favorite memory of your loved one is this: give a hug instead of say something. If you don't know what to say, it's better to shut up and say nothing than say the stupid things. I'll bring you some lasagna next Tuesday. Like, bring food, like, do these things, be with them, just sit and feel with them, and keep their memory alive, especially when tough days come, anniversaries come, birthdays, Christmas, Easter. Say their name. Don't be afraid of this, because they want somebody else to say their name too, that they're not forgotten. There's so much as a community we can learn how to care for one another. And more than anything, I think, I don't know when we're wrapping up, but I want to say this: don't put on your definition of grief onto someone else ever. Don't have an expectation or set up an expectation, because we're each individually going through it differently and have come through different gateways in life. And our experience would be very different from the next person. Even when there's 5 people here, we're going to see it differently. So to think, well, you need to be doing this or you ought to be doing that, stop all that. You're not a psychologist. Just be loving in the presence. I don't know. Yeah.
Death sucks, at least for all of us that are left behind.
I wanted people who were close to me to say it's okay to be mad at her.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Yep.
I wanted just an acknowledgement of all the chaos inside that was going on.
So when there's a situation where somebody that died left a very painful situation, I was going through counseling at the time of my mom's death. And so I was lucky to process this with somebody else. And she was telling me that instead of saying she was all bad, that's unhealthy. Or there are people that go into La La Land. Oh, she was all wonderful. She was a saint. That's not healthy either. But to have them intention and recognize all of it, that will help you process your grief better, because you're not playing head games. You're being honest with what you remember, and then you might get more illumination later, 7, 10, 20 years later.
My dad was a horrible person, horrible. And I didn't speak to him for almost 20 years before he passed. And we didn't even have a funeral because really no one who knew him liked him. But a few months after he passed, he visited me in a dream. And my brother and I were sitting at a picnic table, and he walked up and he said, Why do you hate me so much? And I slammed my hands on the table and said, Really? And he lowered his head and said, I'm sorry. And that was so much healing for me, just to have, it was a dream. It was not reality in any way, but even having someone who was a monster in this life, in a dream, just admit to saying sorry, healed a lot for me. I wish you all that kind of message. Okay, my tissue's done. I think we've all pretty beat after this conversation. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and coming on and talking and dealing with this extremely painful subject. Okay, Peter, any final words, and where can people find you?
I guess I have that tagline, which is truth spoken in love always carries presence. You can find me on Facebook, and and if you have dreams that I can help to try to interpret, please approach me.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Robert, any final words, and where can people find you?
I mean, I'm on Facebook. You reach out. I might reply. I don't know. Twitter, I'm on now and again. Instagram, same way. Best way to get a hold of me is just my emails. I think they're on my Facebook page and stuff. And I'm usually pretty good about replying to that. And I know this is a really tough topic to talk about, but I think it's healthy, to talk about because it's part of life. We'll all go through it.
Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing the story about your dad. Anna, my beloved.
What I always remember is the biblical story of when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and it was empty. And that feeling of going somewhere to look for somebody you loved who had died and not finding them. And then the joy of being called by your name and turning around and seeing them was so beautiful. And then right after that, don't touch me, I'm not ready. Encapsulates so much of mourning and love and acceptance and waiting, just waiting, and faith that love will bring you all the way through, and love is always there even if you can't touch it.
Yeah.
I don't have tissue. I don't have a Kleenex.
We weren't prepared for this. That was one of the things that really the death of Jesus really got to me, because we hold on and we build these things as far as he's still with us. And if he is, so are our loved ones, in my opinion. Thank you, Anna. Mike, for all of your wisdom. Final words, and where can people find you?
On Facebook and YouTube and all that fun stuff. Links are below. But I would like to end this with Jesus showing up late for a funeral. 4 days. Seriously. 4 days late for a funeral.
Thank you.
And not just of somebody, his best friend. And when he shows up, he does something powerful. This shows how we are to process all this. When he gets there, he doesn't say, guys, seriously, I'm going to raise him from the dead. Like, come on, chill. Instead, the scripture says he wept. And in weeping, he identified with the pain of those around him. He didn't dismiss it. He engaged in it. And I think when people are facing somebody else who's grieving, they don't want to engage in it. They want to avoid it because it's gonna bring out things that are undealt with in their own lives. So engage, weep with those who weep. I know we like celebrating with those who celebrate, but weep with those who weep. And then Jesus did the freaky tiki, get up, Lazarus, let's go. It still ended well, but in the moment he paused. I thought that was cool.
And he cried, so we can.
He didn't say, "Oh, they saw a trickle roll down his cheek." No, he wept.
He manly wept. Robert, he wept. Yes.
Yeah, just more proof that it's okay to cry.
Yes.
Whew, heavy show. Thank you all so very much. I'm going to send you backstage. Again, thank you for your vulnerability and your stories, and it was such a pleasure to share this moment with you. Oops. Wow. Okay. It's a part of life. I hope that we were able to give you some tools today to get through the tough times. We have two very special people in my life have recently lost their mother. My dear friend Heidi, who has been my friend for more than 30 years, and our beloved David Keith Greenaway just lost his mother too. So I hold space for you. I love you, and I hope that you all found a way to get through your grief in the way that you can. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe. Be sure to go to my website, charitypalace.com, and go to a moment of love. Send that love. Let's cover the planet. I'm going to go fresh myself and blow my nose, and I will see you next week. I don't even have my shit together enough to even say what the show is. So walk in love and have an amazing week. I love you. Mwah. Bye-bye.